What happens when the media writes the story before the truth shows up? A reporter steps in front of a camera, delivers a dramatic claim with full confidence, and the fan base reacts exactly the way it was designed to react. Social media lights up. Sports radio erupts. The headline spreads fast. Fans start debating. Comment sections overflow. And then, before the dust even settles, the person at the center of the story steps forward and says, "Wait, that's not what happened. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what unfolded around Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns." And the fallout didn't just raise eyebrows. It raised serious, documented questions about the credibility of the reporting, the motives behind it, and who exactly benefits when certain narratives get pushed into the public conversation at very specific moments. This isn't about speculation. This is about a pattern of stories that arrive with dramatic energy, get consumed by a hungry news cycle, and then quietly collapse when the actual facts surface. And this pattern has a name attached to it, a byline, a platform, and a track record that Browns fans have been side-eyeing for longer than most people in national media want to acknowledge. Mary Kay Cabot rolled out a story like it was airtight, like nobody would question it, like fans would just nod along and move on. That was a massive miscalculation, because instead of the narrative sticking, the truth punched through the noise, and Shedeur Sanders is standing taller than ever in the middle of it all. Three things are at the center of this conversation: credibility, selective framing, and one quarterback who keeps delivering results while the stories around him keep unraveling. When those three things collide, and they are colliding right now in real time, you don't get a small correction buried at the bottom of a column. You don't get a quiet clarification slipped into a follow-up segment. You get a full public reckoning, and that is precisely what is happening. Now the real question starts buzzing. Is this part of Kevin Stefanski's bigger chess move? Or is Mary Kay Cabot out here freelancing chaos on her own? Because when something this loud drops and immediately starts unraveling, people are going to look around and ask who lit the match. This doesn't feel like standard reporting. This feels staged, scripted, like someone hit publish before double-checking the receipts. Let that sit for a second. Because that is not a casual accusation. That is a measured observation based on what was reported, what actually happened, and how quickly the gap between those two things became impossible to ignore. When the framing of a story and the reality of a situation are that far apart, and when the people directly involved go on record to say so immediately and without hesitation, the conversation stops being about football and starts being about accountability. And accountability is exactly what is missing from the way Mary Kay Cabot has been operating in her coverage of this franchise. Look at the broader picture here. The Cleveland Browns have spent years as one of the most scrutinized franchises in professional football, not always for the right reasons. The quarterback carousel has been well documented. The coaching changes have been well documented. The organizational turbulence has been well documented. And in the middle of all of that, there has been a consistent media presence, shaping how the public receives information about this team. Not always reporting the story, sometimes steering it. That distinction matters enormously. Reporting the story means following the facts wherever they lead and delivering them accurately. Steering the story means deciding the destination first, and then selecting which facts to include, which to downplay, and which to leave out entirely. One of those approaches serves the audience. The other one serves an agenda. And Browns fans, who have invested decades of loyalty into this franchise through some of the most difficult stretches in NFL history, deserve the former, not the latter. This is why the current situation has generated the response that it has. It is not just one story. It is not just one segment. It is the accumulation of a pattern that keeps producing the same result: a dramatic narrative, a fan base reaction, and then a collapse when the real information surfaces. The formula is consistent. A big narrative push arrives with heavy implication and confident delivery. Fan reaction spikes. Sports radio and social media amplify the energy. And then, when more information surfaces, when the players speak, when the coaches respond, when the actual context becomes clear, the structure of the story starts giving way, not gradually, not subtly, visibly, publicly, in a way that makes the original reporting look less like journalism and more like positioning. At some point, you stop calling it tough journalism and start calling it selective framing. And selective framing has consequences. It shapes how fans view players. It shapes how national media picks up local stories. It shapes the environment a quarterback walks into every single day when he shows up to do his job. When a reporter with an established platform frames a player's development in a way that minimizes his own effort and amplifies someone else's contribution, and the player himself pushes back on that framing, the responsibility for that narrative lands squarely on the reporter. Shedeur Sanders did not arrive at the Cleveland Browns looking for external credit to be assigned to his development. He arrived as a quarterback who had spent years building his game, studying defenses, and earning his position through documented performance. The idea that his progress in Cleveland should be primarily attributed to Kevin Stefanski, when Sheduer himself has publicly disagreed with that framing, is not analysis. It is agenda. Trust is earned in drops and lost in headlines. That line captures exactly what is at stake here. Every time a report drops that doesn't align with what players are saying, every time a narrative collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, every time a dramatic story gets walked back or quietly ignored after the damage is already done, trust erodes. And once that trust is gone, it doesn't come back because of one accurate segment or one well-sourced report. It requires a sustained, consistent commitment to facts over framing. And right now, that commitment is not visible in Mary Kay Cabot's coverage of this team. Why does it always feel like certain players get automatic doubt, while others get automatic grace? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a pattern observation with real examples attached to it. Examples that will be broken down in full detail throughout this video. Because the Shedeur Sanders situation is not an isolated incident. It connects directly to how other players on this roster have been covered, how other narratives have been constructed and then dismantled, and how a consistent tilt in the reporting has gradually become impossible to ignore. The fan base is not naive. Browns fans have watched enough seasons, survived enough disappointments, and followed enough media cycles to recognize when something feels off. And right now, a lot of this feels off. Not because fans are being overly protective of a player they want to succeed, but because the reporting keeps producing the same result: dramatic claim, public contradiction, quiet pivot, and nobody in the media is being asked to account for it. Shedeur Sanders is standing steady through all of it, watching, listening, performing. Every time a narrative tries to cast doubt on his development, his preparation, or his future with this franchise, the field answers, not with words, not with social media posts, with execution, with results, with the kind of performance that makes dramatic pre-written narratives look exactly like what they are. And that is the story that actually matters, not the headlines that collapse under scrutiny, not the segments that unravel the moment the player speaks. The story that matters is what happens when the ball is snapped, when the defense is dialing up pressure, and when the game is on the line. That is where Shedeur Sanders lives. That is where he operates. And that is where every manufactured narrative about him goes to die. The noise is not stopping, but neither is he. Shedeur Sanders arrived at the Cleveland Browns carrying one of the most discussed college quarterback ursums in recent memory. His arm talent was documented. His football IQ was documented. His preparation habits were documented by people who had watched him work up close for years. And from the moment his name entered the Browns' conversation seriously, the media environment around him was anything but neutral. The takes came fast. The narratives formed quickly, and not all of them reflected what was actually happening on the field or inside the building. That is not an opinion. That is observable. Because when a player has to go on record to correct a story about his own development, using precise, specific language, the gap between the reporting and the reality is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of fact. And the facts in this situation point in one very clear direction. The most recent flashpoint was direct and public. Mary Kay Cabot went on record claiming that Kevin Stefanski is one of the main big reasons why Shedeur Sanders is performing the way he is. On the surface, a viewer might absorb that as a straightforward coaching endorsement. A coach is doing good work. A quarterback is developing. That sounds reasonable. But the implication underneath that framing, the suggestion that Shedeur's development is more attributable to what Stefanski is providing than to what Sheduer himself is putting in, is precisely where the problem begins. And it did not take long for that problem to surface publicly. Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, responded immediately. His pushback was not measured or diplomatic. It was direct and unambiguous. His response was, "Come on, bro. Get up out of here. That's lies, bro." That is not the language of someone who believes a point is slightly exaggerated or mildly off base. That is the language of someone who watched a false narrative get dressed up as analysis and refused to let it stand unchallenged. Coach Prime knows his son's work ethic better than any reporter covering the Cleveland Browns. He has watched the preparation up close. He has seen the hours. He has seen what actually drives Shedeur's development. And what Mary Kay Cabot described was not it. Then Shedeur Sanders himself responded, and his response was not vague or emotional. It was specific, informed, and drawn directly from his own first-hand experience inside the building. He addressed the particular claim about extra film sessions, the suggestion that these sessions were a meaningful factor in his performance trajectory. His position was stated plainly. He described those sessions as hungry dog film sessions and said directly, "That really don't help me. It's cool, but that doesn't help me." He did not stop there. He drew a precise distinction between two different categories of work. He said, "That's hungry dog footage. That's not the other footage. What actually develops his game, by his own account on the record, is playing with the ones, getting live reps against top competition, operating in real game situations where the stakes are real and the reads are genuine. That is where a quarterback actually grows, not in supplementary film sessions that get repackaged in a media narrative as some kind of secret ingredient to his progress." The player contradicted the narrative before it even had time to breathe. That is not a minor footnote. That is the central fact of this entire situation. When the subject of a story, a prominent, established NFL quarterback, directly challenges the core claim of that story using his own words and his own firsthand knowledge, the burden of proof does not shift slightly. It shifts entirely. Mary Kay Cabot is not an anonymous voice floating theories on a message board. She is a prominent, established reporter with decades of experience covering the Cleveland Browns. Her platform carries institutional weight. When that platform is used to push a narrative that the player himself immediately and publicly disputes with specific language, accountability is not optional. It is required. And here is what adds another layer to this entire situation. Shedeur Sanders is not someone who operates without awareness of what is being said about him. He listens. He tracks the conversations. He pays attention to the reporting and the narratives that circulate around his name. He is not operating in a vacuum, disconnected from the media environment surrounding his career. So when he goes on record to contradict a specific claim, not broadly, not emotionally, but with precise language about what actually contributes to his development, that is a deliberate and fully informed correction. He knew exactly what was being said. He knew exactly where the framing was wrong, and he addressed it directly. Coach Prime made his position equally clear. He was not vague or searching for the right diplomatic phrasing. He called it lies. One word, without hesitation, without qualification. Now the real question starts buzzing. Is this part of Kevin Stefanski's bigger chess move? Or is Mary Kay Cabot out here freelancing chaos on her own? Because when something this loud drops and immediately starts unraveling, people are going to look around and ask who lit the match. The timing of this narrative is worth examining carefully. Shedeur Sanders' arrival in Cleveland was not a quiet roster move. It was a headline event, a high-profile quarterback with documented talent, a famous last name, and a legitimate case for being the most prepared signal caller to enter the Browns building in years. The natural response from certain corners of the media was predictable. Frame every aspect of his development as dependent on something external. Credit the coach, credit the system, credit the circumstances. And in doing so, consistently minimize what Shedeur Sanders himself is building through his own effort, his own study, and his own preparation. That framing is not accidental. It is a choice. And it is a choice that carries consequences for how fans, analysts, and the broader NFL media universe perceive a quarterback who has not been given the same automatic grace that other players at his position routinely receive. Deion Sanders got tired of it. The line was crossed, and this time it didn't just backfire. It exploded in slow motion right in front of everybody. What makes this situation particularly significant is that Shedeur Sanders had already been on record about this exact topic before Mary Kay Cabot made her claim. He had already drawn the distinction between film sessions and live reps. He had already communicated what actually sharpens his game. The information was available. The context was accessible, which means the framing Mary Kay Cabot chose was not a product of missing information. It was a product of a deliberate editorial direction that did not align with what the player himself had already stated publicly. That is the definition of selective framing. Not fabricating facts entirely, but choosing which facts to elevate, which context to include, and which perspective to center, in a way that guides the audience toward a predetermined conclusion. And the predetermined conclusion here was that Kevin Stefanski deserves significant credit for Shedeur Sanders' development in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders did not accept that conclusion. His father did not accept it, and the record does not support it. Through all of this noise, Shedeur Sanders remains consistent. Same work ethic, same preparation, same command of the offense. He is not flinching every time a new article drops with a new angle on his development. He is not reacting to every segment that tries to redistribute credit for his performance. He is doing what he has always done, showing up, putting in the work that he himself has identified as meaningful, and letting the results speak with a clarity that no narrative can override. The field tells the truth, and right now the truth is standing firmly on Shedeur Sanders' side. Every clean read, every third down conversion, every drive that ends in points, that is how narratives quietly collapse. Not through press conferences, not through rebuttal tweets, through execution that makes the original framing look exactly like what it was. A story that was written before the truth had a chance to show up.